Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Symposium, the Generative Archive, Research, Methods, and Practices. And thank you all for defying the weather and all else to be here with us in Abu Dhabi. Glad that you made it to Abu Dhabi rather than Dubai for today. And so we're really very happy to have you with us. I'm Salwa Mikdadi, Professor of Practice in Art History and the Principal Investigator and the Founding Director of the Mawrid Arab Center for the Study of Art. I am honored to co-convene this symposium along with Nada Shabout, Regents Professor of Art History at the University of North Texas, and Annika Lenson, Associate Professor of Art History at the University of California in Berkeley, and an investigator at Mawrid Arab Art Archives. I want to also give special thanks to Lara Belady for curating the artist panel, which we are really looking forward to listening to this afternoon. We are particularly grateful to NYU Research Institute Tamkeen grant that supports the symposium and the center's activities, and to the Arts and Humanities Division for their continued support of the Mawrid and its activities. At this point, I'm going to invite the Associate Dean, Joanna Settle, who has been deputized by our Dean of the Arts and Humanities, to say a few words. Unfortunately, the internet connection did not work very well, but we're very happy to have Joanna. Thank you, Joanna.
Good morning. Good morning. So I'm here on behalf of Awam Ampa, who I am not. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Social Impact, and I'm a practicing artist. I'm an arts professor of theater. And when we function as a dean's team, when we're developing our ideas and trying to support the work of the division, and consistently in all of our meetings, when we begin to cross a bridge about the successes and the moments where we feel the university is fulfilling its promise as a liberal arts institution located in the UAE, generating new knowledge between artistic practices and scholarship, a Research One university, consistently we point to the work of Salwa Mikdadi and her team. And the innovative, critical, essential work that the center is doing. We struggle to keep up with her and her team, and we try to honor, but if we could, we would pour everything we had into Mawrid, really, because it is such a privilege to be part of enabling this critical work. So on behalf of the Dean's Office, on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and the Provost, thank you so much for finding your way here to engage and exchange on these questions and provocations that Mawrid is bringing today. So thank you sincerely, and I look forward to the talks.
Thank you, Joanna. That was great. Great introduction. And I'm going to say a few words about Mawrid and then move on with the rest of the program. Mawrid Arab Center for the Study of Art was established in the late 2020, actually the last month of that year in the midst of COVID. Since its inception, the center aimed to develop research and pedagogy based upon art narratives and practices from the region and the theoretical perspectives and debates that have been particular to the region in the modern period. Mawrid is centered around the construction and management of the Arab Art Archive, which acquires primary source material pertaining to modern art across the Arab world between 1850 to 1995, to the dawn of the digital age. We are particularly grateful to the custodians of these archives, the artists, their families, and others for allowing us to digitize these collections on locations. This is achieved with the help of a dedicated group of researchers working in different locations across the Arab world and beyond. They include art historian Mehri Khalil in Cairo, Abdullah al-Mutayri in Kuwait, Ra'id Ibrahim in Amman and Beirut, and Ali Yas in Berlin, working together with Al-Mawrid's team to make available the material necessary for the development and the deepening of the scholarship that is so urgently needed in the study of the history of art of the Arab world. It is the same team who worked hard to make today's events possible. The center's manager of the administration, Maha Musa, the research assistant, Maysa Shair, archivist Jonathan Burr and Ibrahim Ali, research scholar Ala Yunus, and the Arab Art Archive investigator Anika Lanson. We thank them all for making it possible to move forward with our ambitious aims at Al-Mawrid. The center extends the interdisciplinary research through collaboration with other faculty at NYU Abu Dhabi. Faculty who work with us on major projects such as Professor May Dabbagh Haraka Experimental Lab for Arab Art and Social Thought. More on this project by May herself in tomorrow's session. And Professor Shamoun Zamir's Akasa Photography Project, which has a dedicated website of photographic heritage of the Arab world and the wider region. And I welcome Tudge Ozge, who was the director of this project not long ago and was instrumental in making it possible. So if you have more questions about Akasa, you could ask Ozge and, of course, our trusted archivist, Jonathan. The Generative Archive Research Methods and Practices is convened to coincide with the publication of our first finding aid for its Arab Art Archive. The symposium explores the generative nexus of archival and research practices that emerge from the practical challenges of developing, collecting, and describing strategies that respond to the collective needs of the artists, the custodians, the scholars, and other communities who work with us or access these archives. We have a rich two-day program starting with the very first panel, Approaches to Archival Architecture and Ownership. I would hand over now to my colleague Nada Shabout, who will be moderating the next session. I just want to remind you to turn off your phones and that after this session, you can follow all the program in your agenda that in the packet. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Salwa, for launching this and for the whole idea of the center. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Good morning. I am Nada Shabout, and I will be moderating the first panel. This is going to be a little bit of changes happening because clearly there are many things taking place, including weather, that prohibited some participants from being here in person. So this is going to be a hybrid session with 2 out of the 3 presenters actually being on Zoom after our first speaker. Throughout this whole symposium, we will be only introducing the speakers sort of with their affiliation. You should have a printout in the packet that has full bios for everyone, as well as full abstracts for the panels. The main goal we have is to really generate conversations. So we're hoping is that after each of the presenters put their topics on view for all of us, that we can engage between the participants as well as with everyone in conversations. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. who is Zahia Rahmani, Head of Global History of Art Research at the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art in Paris. Zahia, would you please?
Okay.
I will be strict with you.
Thanks very much.
For the first panel.
No, thanks. Thanks very much. Hello, everybody. Sorry for my English, okay? I can give a talk in Berber, in French, but not in English, but I taste, okay? The most important thing for me, it was also thanks for this invitation, you know? And the part of my intervention, it's about my database, because I was involved during a long time inside the recense of non-European periodicals. But when I said periodicals, it's about non-European criticals and cultural journal from the non-European country. And my talk today, it's about also the database, because the database exists, is in free access and open access, is not totally finished, and it's about also a part of the Arabs periodicals inside this database. You find this database. I give a talk about this database. You have this database in French or in English there, okay? Perhaps the most important thing will be, I come back on this thing, but you have the, since just before this project, you know, just before this project, seismography of struggle toward a global history of critical and cultural journals, I was involved in the big exhibition and also recense about cartography and colonization. And this project was also about the colonization in Africa and specifically in north of Africa, in Algeria. But during this time, I was surprised because it was difficult for me to find how the population, the African people, and also the non-European people, you know, was involved not just in the fight, but in the intellectual fight during the colonization, and also the difficulty about right and edition during this moment, you know. And after this exhibition, perhaps sorry, because you need a point of view about this exhibition, I think. This exhibition, made in Algeria, it was about, you know, cartography and how, with the white space, you write another history. You understand, you know? Because during a long time, the point of view of the north of Africa was this, with subjectivity, and with the rationalization, you have another kind of card, you know, another kind of map. It was, sorry, I use this PowerPoint because you find the catalog about this exhibition. This exhibition was very important about cartography and colonization, but at the beginning you have this beautiful map about north of Africa, and after you have another consideration about Africa, and you have this kind of map. You know, you find the fight between, you know, the European people and the North of African people. You can say the Muslim people also. On the map, you have always the idea of the fight. For example, with this map, if you want to see. You have this conflict between the Muslim and the Christian people. Okay, but it's map. at this moment, but it's also painting, you know. And the exhibition, was a specific moment for me because it was very hard. During all this project and during all the research, I was surprised by a lot of specific writing during the 19th century about the Arab people. It was very hard, you know, and I'm surprised by this writing because I think the problem, we have a problem today between the Occident, between the European society and the Arab world. And when you write this kind of writing at the beginning of the 19th century, and it's very easy to find this kind of title because it's in free access, you will be surprised by how the French intellectual write some very bad portrait of the Arab people. And I was surprised because they said Arab people, but in North of Africa, there are not a lot of Arab people. A lot of people come from the Turkish, Africa, and there was Berber people. Not all the people who was Arab in North of Africa. You find Arab people in the town, not in the countryside, okay? And at the end of my this project and the exhibition, I was in NYU for 1 semester, and the idea of the Arab periodicals comes, not just Arab periodicals comes, but the periodicals from non-European people, because it was hard when you are involved in the story of the colonization. It's very, I was sick at the end because I was surprised by the anti-Semitism, the hate of the Arab people from the European. You know, the anti-Semitism and the la phobie des Arabes, the Arabs phobic, you know, was in the same time in the 19th century. And it was hard for me, and I was invited by NYU for this project, and it was at this moment, and yes, at this moment, the project was finished. I was involved in the project of the periodicals. I come back now for the periodicals. On the periodicals. You have the database on your computer, on cellular, and now I want to say something about this project. Okay. Seismography of Struggle Research Project, Arab Periodicals in the Critical and Cultural Space and Global History. Okay. Now, this project is a database. We have also 2 books about this project. I have French version and English version for one. It looks like a performativity, but it's performativity because you need database, you need books, you need exhibition. If you want to change the background, the epistemologic background of the European world. During a long time, you have always the same ontology about art. When you want to know how the people think the art, you have always ontology with this term, art, and you find always the same country. Art comes from the European people or Occidental, or the, okay, can say, l'ère occidentale. You understand? And I'm in the National History of Art in Paris, and regularly, some teacher, some researcher write and propose a new publication with always the same title, Ontology of Art. And you find always the same country. And one day, I proposed another project. I said, perhaps, if you change this term, art, by another term, culture, and if you use also critics behind culture, perhaps it will be possible to find a new way about history of the culture. And the idea was very, very easy because I proposed this project, I received money, and during 3 years, I proposed different roundtables about critical journal, but the idea is cultural and critical journal from non-European country. But I have no idea how was the first. He was the first. Regularly, in my country, we have some book about the first critical journal, and you have always the same title, La Revue des Deux Mondes, or other review from always the European country. And the idea, it was also how and why and with how was the tools from the non-European community against colonization? Because it was very hard. For example, in North of Africa, we have not paper, we have not print. When you come from the autochthone population, it was the same for the black people in the United States, it was the same for the Indian people, it was the same for the Arabs people. You have not access at the print, at the library, and different shop for your spirit and also your edition. And I was really surprised because after 3 years and different meetings with 40 researchers, the project was very wonderful because at the end you have found 1,000 periodicals with manifesto. You know, with manifesto. It's not just periodicals about cooking, about fashion, no, with manifesto. Behind manifesto, you have criticals and politics. You have on this picture, you have also a point of view about the exhibition, because the idea, it was also how, when I travel in the world, sorry for this term, but in Africa, for example, it's difficult for the people to access in all these periodicals. With the exhibition, it was very easy because on this installation, you use 9,000 pictures, and it looks like a book. It takes 1 hour. The exhibition takes 1 hour if you want to read some manifesto and understand how, during 2 centuries, the non-European collectivity right the fight against the colonization, but not just the colonization, it's against also the fight for your language, for your culture, and also your politics project. I give some picture of the exhibition, very, very. Now this exhibition is in Zuid-Smoka in South Africa, and the first time it was in NYU at the Gallatin faculty. The exhibition was at the Gallatin, and after in Colombia, in South Africa, in Senegal, in Morocco, in Lebanon, and Bangladesh. I was surprised because it's not finished, you know, but regularly, because it's also cultural and pedagogic, and the narrative is really important. For example, when the exhibition was in Senegal, the student was surprised by the archive from the African people. Nobody knew how was this fight. It's the same for the Arab world. Sorry, I come back now, and the you know, you have some ontology about, you know, periodicals. And I want to say something about also, I know this magazine, for example, about women in France and the other, but it was not my problem at this moment. In my project, it was, I was more interested by the feminism inside the non-European country. And for example, we have a wonderful Alas magazine from Egypt, and from the women also. Okay. I stopped this thing. It was a issue. I want to say something about this thing. The title is in French. Lettre d'un cultivateur américain, you know. It's a letter from the American farmer. This American farmer, he wrote this book. And it is the portrait of this man. This man was French and was in the United States. At the boundary, he lived there, you know, at this time in the 18th century. He was in the United States, not so far from New York, the New York State, you know, and he wrote a wonderful book about the European, when the European live with the Indian people. You find this book in French, and you find this book in English too. The letter of the American farmer. And I was surprised because in this text, it was the first time I read this thing, you know, all the white people, when the white people who was with the Indian people, they don't want to come back inside the European community. It was the first time I read this thing, you know, when the European people meet the Indian people inside the United States, the name is not United States at this moment, it was America, they don't want to come back. And this man, Krefker, it was the role, he was involved in this idea, you know, we need the European people come back inside the community. And in this book, you have a very, very long text about why the European, they don't want to come back, you know. Perhaps the life was better with the Indian people. And perhaps you have an idea about colonization. Why the European people move in the America? Because the life in Europe was not so good at this moment. You don't find anything. We have no sugar, no fruits. The color of life was very brown. And I know all this because it's my other project today. It's about, I write about, you know, fruits and alimentation in the world at this moment. But I come back now about magazines. But we need to understand that, you know, why the European people, why the European government, European state was involved in this big new colonization since the end of the 15th century and after. You need to understand that. Why they want to disturb the other community in the world. And with this exhibition and this anthology about magazines, I have found why, okay? A part of why I come back. Sorry. Okay. If perhaps one day it will be possible to find the exhibition, you have a point of view of the exhibition. In this exhibition, in the book, in this project, you have the first magazines, the manifesto, and some portrait from the redactor. You have a portrait of the first redactor in this project. But if you want to know now, where is my database? I come back. Okay. If I want to know, for example, the journal, I use this term, and about Arab's world, you use this part, Asia. And you find the Arabs magazines. And you will be surprised because you find the magazines with my, my notice, you know, because you propose a notice, specific notice about the magazines, but also you have the connection with the magazines. And you can consult the magazines with the link, numeric link, in Arabic sometime or in English. Okay, sorry. Yes, why, I once said something. It's very difficult to find a very good Arabs library about this patrimony. It's very strange about Arabs magazines. It's not the same for the other. Some magazines, a lot of magazines, you find database about Arabs magazines inside, for example, the Bonn Library. Sorry, I want to say something about partners of this thing. I work for this project with different partners in my country, but also, look, the free access is possible because you have all this library in the world was involved and connected with this project, you know, in free access. We have not the same thing with Gestor. All the people know, you know. And the best magazine, for example, in Africa, Transition, from South Africa, is not in open access today because Gestor have the propriety of these magazines. But a lot of libraries in the world conserve a part of Transition. That's why it was easy for me to use the digital Transition journal because I have contract with the other. But I want to say something about all this Al-Sharik archive and the other. All this institution was involved in the idea of the free access. That's why it was easy for us to find now some digital Arabs magazines. And if I use the term Arab, sorry, it's about language. How many? You have one portrait about Huda Sharawi. It was a great woman, feminist woman. She was involved in this journal, Egyptian. But also, we have a lot of Arabic journal about decolonization. If you have a map in free access, and if you are in this part of the world, you find some journal, you are in Egypt, there or there. On est où ici? Dans quel pays? Dans les Émirats. Mais dans les Émirats, il y a des revues. Voilà. Voilà, vous avez une revue ici. You can use by the map. The map is important because you can see. Sorry, I come back. There are no center in this project. You know, the Europe is not the center of this project. The most important thing is the connection, and you have also if you can also use this if I know Rabin, I use Tagore specifically because a lot of people know this man, you know. And if I want to know who and how this man was involved, sorry, it's not in different magazines, you find the name of this man. You know he was involved in this Sadhana review, Visa Bharati Quarterly. You have the name of the review. It was, you know, it was an, sorry. Okay. And also, you find a different connection with the other, and that's why it's difficult for me, because when you said Arabics magazines, you find the Arabics, but you have also regularly some connection between, for example, the people from North of Africa and Syrian magazine. Arabic magazine with Indian magazine. You have a connection between the intellectual. That's why you use this thing. And also I come back in the index. Okay. You have the name of all the intellectual was involved in the magazines from different countries, Sudan, Egypt for the Arab world, and also Algeria. Some people, they come from Syria. Lot writer, Arabic writer was in the United States, in Great Britain, and France. But you have the portrait in this. The most important thing was there are a lot of people was involved in this project. I finish. About this movement, for example, you use also some terms, Pan-Africanism, Pan-Arabism. Inside the Pan-Arabism, we have, sorry, hello. Some magazines, specific Arab magazine about Pan-Arabism, you know, Al-Muktabas, Al-Ghad, La Nation Arabe, Hiwar. And the most important thing also, you have this. When you, this database, because I have linked with the other database. This database, it's the Al-Sharak Archive. You find this database in Arabic or in English. And you can enter inside the Arabs magazines, you know. The most important thing for me was the link with the other resources. Lot of resources, they come from Germany, and also, we don't know why, from anonymous project. It's difficult to find who it was behind this project, for example. But it was not inside the Arab country. Now, I want to say something about one country, Morocco. When I was at the beginning of this project, it's difficult to find inside the Arab library, Arab state, some numeric journal or digital journals. I want to say something about Morocco. At the beginning of this project, it was difficult to find the most important journal in Morocco. Now, and the criteria is important, the democratic criteria is important for that. Inside the National Library in Morocco, you find all the critical journals in open access. In the first Arab country, it was involved in this kind of digitalization. You know, when I said Critics magazine, some magazine was really involved against, for example, Hassan II. But you find now all this journal inside the National Library in Morocco and in open access today. And I finish, sorry. I want to come back. Yes. It's about, you know, the connection between the Arab world and diaspora. You find a lot of magazines, for example, there, if you want to consult these magazines, when some Arab intellectual was involved in the magazines, you know. And I have 1 minute for the question or not? No? Okay. It's difficult for me because I want to say something. Why I was involved in this thing is when you come from the north of Africa, from the Arab world, it's difficult to find, sorry. If you want to know the memory of the fight from the Arabic community, you need this kind of memories. in access, in free access. And you need also the presentation of this archive. But behind the archive, we have a wonderful manifesto. You will be very surprised by the Arab woman in the Egyptian, Oda Sharawi, in the, I was very surprised by the manifesto because I work with a big team for the language, you know, because for each language I work with specific researcher from China, from Iran, from Syria, from Lebanon. You know, a lot of people was involved with me to understand the manifesto. And the first project for me will be the publishing of all this manifesto. But I was surprised how was the Arab world before the independence. It was very great because the woman was really involved in the fight, really involved in the idea of the education, really involved in the idea of build a new nation. And all this memory is lost today. And we need a big investment inside these memories for the future and the present, you know. If you have a question. Thanks.
After that. So I will need technology now because our next two speakers are going to be joining us on Zoom.
Okay. Hey, close? Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But thank you so much, Zahia. This is an amazing project and wealth of information that we can discuss after. Our next speaker will be joining us from New York, so it's sort of like midnight or what time difference between us. I would like to introduce Kaoukab Chebaro, who is the head of global studies at Columbia University's library. Do we have her? Oh, actually, I just remembered that we have her presentation recorded. So we'll play this, the recorded presentation, and then hopefully she can join us with the Q&A. Do I need to do something? No, okay.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Kaoukab Chebaro and I'm the head of global studies at the Columbia University Libraries and a member of the board of the Mawrid Arab Center. I am sorry that I am unable to join you in person today, but at least I'm happy to be here virtually and I will try to answer some questions in the Q&A session at the end. I'd like to use my time to talk about the Mawrid Art Archive and to do this under the heading of approaches to archival architecture and ownership. I'm going to stop for a moment and share my screen just so that you can see some slides here. Hopefully you can see them by now. So the idea that archives have architectures or are architectural in some way may be surprising to some, but anyone who works with archives will immediately connect to the thought. Archives, like architecture, are both products and process. Archives, like architectural edifices, have one, infrastructure, configuration, framework, and they also have texture or material from which they are made. Second, and perhaps most important, archives operate within a broader context of which they are both a product as well as agents of change. With this image of archival architecture in mind, I'd like to start by drawing attention to some key elements of the general context in which archives operate in our region. Then I will focus on the framework or the making of the Al-Mawrid Archive, its intellectual and ethical principles, and finally, I will conclude by focusing on how all these architectural elements of the archive can position it to be an agent of change. So first, the general context. Where and how does this archive operate? Al-Mawrid Arab Center for the Study of Art defines itself as, quote unquote, a research center and archive dedicated to the interdisciplinary study of the visual arts of the Arab world. It is centered around the construction and management of archival and primary source materials pertaining to modern art across the Arab world between 1850 and 1995. In other words, it is an archive from, about, and in the Arab world. So let us look at the context, the ecosystem in which it operates. It is no secret that archives in the region are under constant threat of eradication and destruction through wars, plundering, exploitation, and confiscation. It is also no secret that there is a dearth of national and academic archives or documentation centers and a consistent, almost stubborn, lack of national strategies to archiving and documentation. An aging population of Arab intellectuals who witnessed the formation of the Arab nation states and the waves of political and intellectual tribulations of the mid-20th century have already left us or are about to leave us, and their papers still lie in individual hands where custodians struggle with upkeep, preservation, dissemination, and access issues. So indeed, this is a stark reality. However, as Sumaya Ahmed has recently said in her published introduction to the Archivist special issue dedicated to archives in the MENA region, appreciating the archives and archival thinking of the Middle East and North Africa, she writes, the region of North Africa and the Middle East rarely appears in American archival literature unless it's used as a metaphor for a stark cultural opposite. Archives and archival collections in the region tend to be described solely in the negative, as absent, decaying, violently destroyed, or totally inaccessible. And while this may be the case in some instances, this does not adequately describe the totality of situations for archival collections in the region. Problematically, such a viewpoint also tends to set up the West as a necessary place of refuge for archival collections without interrogating the role of the West in fermenting instability in the region. So definitely a context of erasure, of exploitation, but also a context of resistance and thoughtful efforts with a clear moral and ethical awareness that, as Foucault said, archives constitute the limits and forms of the sayable, that they are the backbones of rooted narratives, of identities, and ultimately of hope and change. I guess it's obvious, but it should also be noted that Al-Mawrid is also an art archive, and that has its own peculiar context and challenges too. Art archives are vulnerable to other forms of pressure which stem from the market and from commodification forces. With the value of Arab and Middle Eastern art skyrocketing and with a high demand, accompanying archives as witnesses to the primordial moments of the birth of art become intensely mystified and commodified and attract market profiteers, but also well-meaning and well-endowed Western institutions who are interested in adding to the diversity of their collections and who wittingly or unwittingly add to the competitive market forces. This brings me to my final point in this section about the general context of Arab archives, namely the colonial framework within which most of our regional MENA archives are still received, presented, and viewed in international contexts. Sadly, Western-centric centers of knowledge still predominantly hold the power of bestowing meaning and value on archival discourses. However, the problem with this Western central logic is that, as Mignolo says in Learning to Unlearn, Decolonial Reflection from Eurasia and the Americas, while we are all within the geography of Western and colonial logics, not everyone belongs to its memories, feelings, and ways of sensing. Many of us have been trapped in the colonial matrix, but do not belong to it. This colonial matrix of power and meaning is certainly countered by a desire to decolonize the archive. These aspirations and impulses to free the archive demand a praxis that allows one to leverage the archive through a double lens of learning and unlearning to be a positive space of world-making. So, thinking alongside Walsh, decoloniality is not just against, not just resistance, it is also for the ongoing creation of ways of thinking, ways of knowing, ways of being, and ways of living outside and despite coloniality, outside its borders, in its fissures and its cracks. This leveraging of the archive as a world-making tool requires a double process of learning and unlearning. First, learning to engage with the archive with its rooted local and regional discourses and contexts, starting from the premise that our local history is worth digging into on its own terms, of course in a comparative and interdisciplinary manner, but also in a rooted local way. And second, the need to unlearn colonial restrictive tropes and to engage with the archive non-defensively without distractions and gaslighting efforts, as Toni Morrison says in this important quote. So going back to the archival metaphor, how is this decolonial architecture built within the Al-Mawrid archive? What is the architectural decolonial blueprint here? An underlying decolonial principle that animates Al-Mawrid and defines its approach is its desire to collect with rather than simply about the region. Informing this idea are two main ethical and intellectual principles. First, Al-Mawrid reframing of the idea of ownership and the deliberate choice it has made to operate within the framework of digital collecting or of post-custodial or community-based collecting, moving away from the narrow goal of ownership of the physical artifacts and of extractive collecting practices towards access and collaboration. The central idea here is that ownership of the physical artifacts should be decoupled on ethical and intellectual grounds from the idea of access and ownership. Per Dr. Muqdadi, the founder of the archive, these non-extractive practices of the archive are based on the conviction that these collections are part of the nation's cultural heritage and should remain in their countries of origin. Post-custodialism derives its power from disentangling ownership of physical materials from their description and ultimately from the online access to surrogates. This teasing apart of responsibilities and roles can empower alliances and workflows that aspire to more equitable practices. Questions of representation, of ethics and equity are deployed front and center throughout the various components of building the archive. Shared collecting processes and activities are grounded in partnership and invoke shared content curation, shared responsibilities for building collections, for description of the material. These shared praxes aim to increase multi-geographic collaboration, build trust and long-term partnerships, and increase representation and dialogue, and build a multi-vocal archive to the benefit of researchers and hosting institutions. Second, and crucial here, to the ethical and intellectual standpoint of the archive is the idea of creating a rooted contextual archive that can serve as a site of both learning and unlearning at the same time, and one that operates with the aim of decoloniality. We have already said that Al-Mawrid is an archive about, from, and in the Arab world. It is also, and this is a crucial point, an archive with the Arab world, with the Arab artists, collectors, researchers, scholars, students, etc. Al-Mawrid describes itself as aiming to take the intellectual life of the region as a starting point for exploring alternative modes of knowledge production about its societies and histories. It also presents itself as operating, quote unquote, again, this is from the website, operating with a commitment to collective knowledge production as a means to decolonize cultural histories. The center aims to develop research and pedagogy based upon art narratives and practices from the region and the theoretical perspectives and debates that have been particular to the region in the modern period. Al-Mawrid works with art historians who know the archives and the field, with researchers who have knowledge of the respective country's art history and even of individual artist works. Researchers are hired per project. Currently, there are 4 teams: Cairo, Beirut, Amman, Berlin, Paris, and Kuwait. All are trained in sorting and digitization in Abu Dhabi by the archivists and resident researchers. The researchers, together with a member of the center, visit the custodians or artists repeatedly and work to establish a relationship of trust. The Al-Mawrid team seeks agreement from the custodian to collaborate. They go over the collection, they write an assessment, and they also go to great length to document, understand, and become familiar with the artist's career so that this particular archive can then get leverage into one of the Al-Mawrid many research projects, all while trying to listen to the artist, truly listen and seek to channel and elevate the artist's perspective, both in terms of curation, description, and ultimately in terms of engagement with the material, building on the existing strength of the archive as well as the goals of the artist. And throughout this process, the archive painstakingly tries to build trust with artists, owners, and collectors. One example of building trust is the work of the archive around the Rafi Nasiri and May Muzaffar collection, whereby the center published a memoir written by May on her life with Rafi. The center also tries to give back to the owners and collectors in various forms, including the sharing of selected digitized images upon request, of involving them to the extent possible in the description of the material, or in recording oral history interviews with them to capture their own perspectives. The center also shows flexibility in listening to needs and in sometimes considering helping out in cases where the collections may be at risk. Al-Mawrid also encourages collectors to donate their collections to local institutions in the region, such as AUC in Cairo, and tries to facilitate those conversations. Al-Mawrid also operates with the value of open access to the extent possible and with great respect to privacy, as well as copyright and legal agreements. Materials that cannot be posted open access on the web can still be accessed in the library on dedicated workstations, and personal addresses, personal documents, etc., private matters are not shared, and the wishes, privacy, and risk to individuals are all taken very seriously and are clearly regulated by access and publishing policies too. So, taking all these points about the archive's architecture seriously, why would these principles matter? What do they give us that other archives, which are maybe built differently, do not? I'd like to suggest that all these elements add up to making the archive a tool that goes beyond the act, surely very valuable, of documentation, and beyond the act of simply expanding a narrative. The archive does these things, of course, but it also goes beyond the ethnographic reinscription in history of erased perspectives. I'd like to suggest that an ethically built post-custodial archive, such as the Al-Mawrid Art Archive, because of these ethical principles, because of its collaborative nature, its rootedness in the region, its respect for the intellectual and cultural context, and the perspectives and aspirations of its people, has the potential to be a positive space of world remaking. An ethically built archive provides those who engage with it with a space to learn and unlearn, to teach and be taught as a way to reinforce, create, and encounter with regard and without distractions different geographies and ways of being in the world. It does that by doing 2 things. It does that by doing two two things I'd like to suggest. First, it gives its people, its creators, its users, researchers, a chance to counteract grand, flattening narratives about the realities of the region that are not rooted in the lived experiences of its people. Such an ethical archive can act as a positive space to learn and unlearn simultaneously, so that a more rooted, faithful, detailed narrative can emerge. As Omnia Shakri so aptly says, it gives us a chance to denaturalize the dominant categories and dystopic narratives of Middle Eastern social and cultural history, narratives of awakening followed by catastrophe, or triumph followed by despair, so that we can give the ability to engage in acts of reconstruction of the disparate, quote unquote, horizons of expectation and indeterminate futures that decolonization as a complex series of both historical experiences and ongoing events offers us. Second, and perhaps most important for an art archive such as this one, is the fact that it allows us to see in the details, in the layers and textures of the archive, new specific and local dimensions and layers of the artwork and of the creative act of inscribing beauty onto the world. It gives the archive a forward-looking bent, for it helps unleash our ability to understand, often against the grain, what these acts of inscribing beauty in the world really amount to. The art archive, when built ethically and sensitively, promises to uncover, in the words of Christina Sharp, how the act of creating art can be seen as an instance of engaging in beauty as a method, as a way of reinscribing dignity and humanity in the world against oppression and despair. I'd like to end by reading this quote from Christina Sharp, who quotes Saadia Hartman in Note 51, "Beauty is a method. Beauty is not a luxury. Rather, it is a way of creating possibility in the space of enclosure, a radical act of subsistence, an embrace of our terribleness, a transfiguration of the given. It is a will to adorn, a proclivity for the Baroque, and the love of too much." And last but not least, I'd like to show a clip from Forces of Change, a document.
Dr. Salwa Miqdadi about the powerful exhibit, Forces of Change.
There is a feminist movement in the world, and Arab women are part of it. Their aesthetic activity indicates a growing self-awareness rooted in admiration, revulsion, and resistance, a recognition of the complexities of their history and of the wider world they inhabit. Arab women are seizing the moment to use their art to make an imprint upon the forces of change in their lives. Welcome you to the preview for the exhibition of Arab women artists. Today we have artists from 10 artists representing 3 countries from the Middle East and North Africa. As you see, their work presents a variety of media and styles. The International Council for Women in the Arts is a non-profit tax-exempt organization that was founded 4 years ago in the San Francisco Bay Area. Its objective is to promote the work by women artists from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Their artwork has seldom been exhibited or seen in Europe and in the Americas. And our objective is to maintain a large database, which we continually update and maintain with the help of volunteer representatives in North Africa and the Middle East. We began our first major project by planning an exhibition for artists from the Arab world, because we saw there is a need to promote such artwork by women from that region, especially with the very little knowledge available on the art or the contemporary art by these women in.
Thank you very much. Stop sharing now.
I'll see you hopefully with the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kaoukab. And I don't know if she's hearing us. Hopefully, she will be able to join us. And our third speaker, I mean, there's so much to talk about right after this, the discussion. Our third speaker is Vasif Kortun, who's a research consultant at Mathaf Arab Museum of Modern Art and the former director of research and programs at SALT in Istanbul, Turkey. So we also have a recorded presentation from him. And I know he is online.
Intersections. The question was how we can support research in place and communicate that knowledge most democratically. When I started, the archives were symbolically vaulted, open only to those presumed to be professionals. I want My involvement with archives started 3 decades ago, as I needed them for myself, other researchers, and also colleagues who would visit Turkey. I started an archive of artists from Turkey to stop local gatekeepers from imposing their choice of who was relevant, and to allow graduate students to access materials they had no course to. In time, with the institutions I was involved in, we expanded to post-war archives and started downgrading artist-specific resources. That was at the end of the 2000s, when I was involved in discussions like the Speak Memory Symposium at Town House, Cairo, subverting colonial imperatives, the financialization of archives that had already taken place in the architectural world, and how to deal with the increasing transfer of data from the global south to the north, and alternatives to it, such as Red Conceptualismos del Sur in Latin America, Padma in India, Reina Sofia in Madrid, and Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong. These were distinct positions encouraging south-to-south intersections. The question was how we can support research in place and communicate that knowledge most democratically. When I started, the archives were symbolically vaulted, open only to those presumed to be professionals. I wanted to change the static relationships where all roles were predetermined, one who records and another who reassigns meaning, contributing to the protected, privatized knowledge with no effort toward distributing it. Consequently, the archive was unavailable, buried beneath complex systems that only those with prior knowledge could access. It was private and in reality protected from the public eye. Instead, I moved my institution, SALT, to open design, providing full entry and passage. The first phase was sharing the full archive with the public online. When institutions from Bibliothèque Nationale France to the Getty chose incrementalism and opened a 10,000 collection here, a 25,000 lot there, we shared 2 million digital objects. Note also that we secured the public rights for each piece of data, operated with a Creative Commons share-alike license, and did not make a penny on not-for-profit use. A few years later, in 2006, we made a second move and opened the site for search engine harvesting. Google indexed all of the metadata that saltresearch.org hosts and made it accessible through Google search. As you know, universities and research centers could be better at access. Even if the data is there, you will know if it exists, if you know precisely where to look. After harvesting, we saw a tenfold increase in access in the first year alone. The caveat behind this is not merely maximizing access to resources, but also accepting a place in a distributed system of broader ecology that decenters the institution. Hence, you do not enter through the mighty gate of the URL, but sideways to the resource. The archive is realized outside the institution, constantly corrected and revised by the public that the outside is much more intelligent than the institution. In areas where state archives are non-existent, our spatialized data has grown into what you could refer to as a national archive, even against our wishes. Equally important was maintaining the archives in the local ecology. We all complain about the physical transfer of data and knowledge from the global south to the north. But the second level of violence is the shift in metadata. It's through metadata searches that we access the data. Hence, the codification of the archive is as critical as the archive itself. If the data is codified in North America, it will be developed according to the criteria and knowledge built there. This particular act of translation is where coloniality may occur. There is always an issue with the reduction of a thing to language. So I looked at alternative ways of reading the data and followed ventures like digital machine-readable archiving of objects according to color intensity, paper type, and density. We collaborated with the new technology and media departments at 3 universities in Turkey to develop new semantic readings because we needed help, but we could not get far. Mine was a simple prerogative to reimagine the role of archivists as traffic controllers rather than metadata creators. Then, in 2016, I consulted my good colleague, Refik Anadol, and asked him a simple question. How can we have the data machine-read and articulated in a way that will not need human intervention? He was off to a residency at Google Artist and Machine Intelligence Program, where he could process massive amounts of data. We did not get there at the time, but what we got, by sheer coincidence, was the propensity of machine intelligence to produce new documents from those that already exist, confirming Borges' story, The Book of Sand, which constitutes an infinite library of every book that has been written, could be written, or will be written. So we made the installation, and the floor and ceiling were mirrored to reflect Borges' library of Babel, written earlier. At SALT, we would not keep the original materials unless obliged. Such a practice adds another layer of protection to the archives and distinguishes public and private rights. Second, Swana region lags in the archival realm. A century of displacements, wars, radical governmental changes has created extreme instability, vulnerability, and conditions of loss that few places on earth have witnessed, as we continue to experience in Gaza today. Being discontinuous, the central governments as repositories do not inspire confidence. That's why initiatives like Al-Mawrid are key. I work as an advisor to Mathaf in Doha, where only 20% of the artists in the collection are in the Getty Research Institute's Union list of artist names. Although Oxford's Benezet Dictionary of Artists provides information over 149,000 artists, only 14% of artists in our collection are covered. Allow me to shift to the topic that guides my curiosity. It's meandering through archives when one research leads to another in an organic, relational, and intersectional weave through minor histories. 3 years ago, we embarked on archiving and researching the history of Turkey's longest-running exhibitions, 45 years already, by the Association of the Museums of Painting and Sculpture and its fraught relationship to the State Museum of Painting and Sculpture in Istanbul. and attempted to collate installation images as well as pictures of singular works to reconstruct the history of the exhibitions. Through the process, I contacted the daughter of an artist, Özer Kabaş, who had passed away in 1998. She mentioned that there was material at home, and it would be better if I reviewed it. During my visit, I realized this was a perfect archive to expand art history in Turkey in the 1960s. The first impulse was to undo some of the mythologies regarding introducing basic design and the Academy of Fine Arts in Istanbul at the beginning of the 70s. It was a quick fix to place the basic design program in the context of student boycotts in an emancipatory political environment. Although the boycott committee had a few suggestions about curriculum changes, it did not ask for basic design. SALT had already put the archives of the artist Altan Gürman online. Kabaş started teaching at the academy in 1971, was a close friend of Gürman. Along with a third teacher, they instituted the basic design course at the academy. It turned out that the pundit was Kabaş himself, who completed his graduate studies at Yale University School of Art under Joseph Albers. Albers was 3 years away from publishing his pedagogical masterpiece, Interaction of Color. And his Bauhaus-inspired teaching dominated the school in the 1950s. Kabaş was particularly close to Neil Welliver, Albers' assistant, which made him the primary person in the Academy of Fine Arts to have the full experience of basic design. An enigmatic work that stayed with me for years was the drawing he parted with Abby Gray, whom I trust you know. The particular drawing has multivalent associations. The brush is on the artist's left hand in front of the easel. Hence, the continuum between the palette and the easel becomes absurdly evident, indicating a generic abstract expressionist style that we know Kabaş was displeased with. The skull seems to refer to mentally rotting away with an imported artistic practice. We know that Kabaş was allergic to adapting styles without delivering anything from one's habitus and named it montage. The drawing is a succession of montages of a palette, of a practice, and an attire, as confirmed by the title of the painting. Hello, Miss Gray, we're just fine. During the archiving process, we discovered that Kabaş was the key figure in creating a short film festival at Robert College in Istanbul, Turkey, where he was teaching, acting as director of student affairs and advisor of the Robert College Cinema Club. Further scrutiny revealed the importance of the short film festival, its divergence from existing practices, and the total absence of any literature on it. The Cinema Club realized Turkey's first annual festival of short films, Hisar Short Film Days, for an emancipatory cinema, which started in 1967. The film days hailed to be an alternative to Turkish mainstream cinema with a competition of 8 and 16 millimeter films, featuring a variety of more than 100 shorts, including fiction, documentary, and animation. A jury of leading cultural figures chose the winning films and gave different awards, including the James Baldwin Prize. In its first year, Kabaş's Memory of Istanbul won the award. We found and restored the film from the Turkish Film Archives and showed it for the first time in 56 years. Memory of Istanbul is the first observational documentary in Turkey, lasting 22 minutes, circling work practices in the Valide Sultan Mosque's outer gardens, featuring street vendors, sherbet sellers, tricksters, photographers, leash therapists, and letter writers for notaries. Unfortunately, the club and the festival were shut down after the military coup of 1971. Independent site research on Hisar Film Days has been going on for the last 18 months, and we have uncovered several films film screenings, and conducted meetings and interviews with the protagonists of the time. You may ask, why? Why was there a James Baldwin Prize in the film days? Baldwin lived in Istanbul, Turkey, on and off for a decade between 1961 and 71. He was in close contact with the theater and literary communities. Özer Kabaş was interested in the photographs of a student from the photography club Sedat Pakay that you see on the screen at Robert College. He ensured that Pakay would also study at Yale and organized even his application. And Pakay, shortly after his return to Turkey in 1969, made the great film From Another Place on James Baldwin's days in Turkey. So what began as a research project on a single artist expanded to the whole cultural field of the 1960s. This also represents a particular spin on Turkey's complex distance to the non-aligned movement. Its leftist politics, peppered with Kemalist nationalism and secularist politics, with its infallible horizon on Europeanism. Turkey's cultural field may have missed the horizontal alignments and anti-colonialist perspective, replacing it with an anti-imperialist position. It may have been in the same pact with Iran and Pakistan as buffer states, CENTO, and even sided with France in the Algerian War of Independence. However, the Kabaş project unveils possible arguments about Turkey's singular position and nuances thanks to his writings that we have collected and published. The book, Montage or Synthesis, is quite precise. To give just 2 quotes to take home, if we try to condemn the indifference of the Ottoman Turkish bureaucracy and intellectuals during the culture collecting frenzy of the times, and its effects that extend to the present day, it could lead us to the absurd conclusion that we should participate in the West's attempt to create a peculiar and fictitious history based on classical Greece. And since the reception of folkloric crafts is extremely static and overly romantic, their relationship with the visual arts is established in an extremely superficial and conservative manner. Not going to the dynamic essence of the problem and choosing repetition as useful is nothing but a crude romanticism and a conservative understanding of civilization. In that vein, let's dial the clock back a few years to Jean Genet's Les Nègres, written under the influence of Frantz Fanon's black-skinned white mask. During the research, we found that the theater club featured the play in 1965 at Robert College. Another Yale student, Ali Taygun, chose to translate an act in Les Nègres, for which Kabaş did the stage design and the masks. Although Fanon was not translated into Turkish before the 1980s, Les Nègres was staged in 1964, 3 years after Paris and New York. The trajectory of Kabaş, from rubbing shoulders with fellow brilliant colleagues during his Robert College days, Yale experience, assisting the transition of Robert College to the state institution Bosphorus University, designing the new logo of the university, to the Academy of Fine Arts that did not have the intellectual intensity of Robert College, only for his love of teaching art and contributions to local and embedded design practices that I did not even talk about here, is worthy of another cultural history. I want to end my words with an annotated section on Kabaş from Godfrey Godwin's Life's Episodes Discovering Ottoman Architecture. The most important event for me was the arrival of Özer Kabaş from America, where he had studied under Albers. He had been appointed director of the social hall. I have never met anyone who did not like Özer, and I was grateful that he liked me, but then he liked anyone. He had only to be himself to be trusted by the students who were soon turning to him for help. Many years later, he had to resist becoming director of the Academy of Fine Arts, where he was universally liked and admired. Özer never treated anyone as less than important. His were not just good manners in the English sense. It would have been inconceivable to him that anyone could be less than human in their own right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wasif, for being with us, at least in spirit, and for your presentation. Hopefully, are we able to get our two speakers to join us? And Zahia, if you join us on the table here, they will join us virtually. We get our colleagues on screen. I really want to thank each one of you for a wonderful presentation. I mean, clearly, it's the title of the panel or the session is Approaches to Archival Architecture and Ownership. We had three different examples, case studies of archival projects, and we can see that in some way each one of them was started as yes, to generate knowledge, but for personal reasons as well. Hi, Wasif. For personal reasons as well. And because they are archives that are non-European, non-Western centered, they specifically had different issues included, and they all invoked the need for decolonization. So equally, the three speakers spoke of destruction, and particularly as we see in the case of Gaza as happening, but of course as continues in the region, Syria and Iraq, for example. In fact, I want to also put on the table a project that I was involved in, because sometimes actually archives are a luxury. So for example, in the case of Iraq, following the 2003 destruction, and I don't know if many of you might be familiar with the Modern Art Iraq Archive, MAIA, that I started basically literally without any funding, because at a time after 2003, and I'm based in America, funding in America was, given to ancient archaeological projects, but not for modern art. So then, that sort of involved another level of colonization of who can who can be modern and who cannot be modern. And the main reason why I started MAIA was because me as a researcher, me as a graduate student whose main source of archival knowledge was Salwa Maghdadi and ICWA in the 1980s and 90s, I needed to provide material for my students. And I also needed to preserve the heritage of, as much as possible, you say preserve heritage, such big words, but to actually preserve some of the memories of the heritage of Iraq. Memories that are not available for Iraqis at the moment, who now in 2024, so 20 years since the invasion, there are generations who know nothing about Jawad Salim, the Baghdad Group for Modern Art, or any of the Iraqi artists. And so MAIA is very simple, very sort of, scan on the go and upload to the community immediately. So it's not as sophisticated as the others, but extremely needed and necessary for the collective memory of Iraq, as well as for scholars. So what I would like us to do now, and I'm sure many of you have a lot of questions, but also possibly, you know, we have questions about each other's archives and different projects. It's sort of like, you know, with Zahia's archival project of journals, which is extremely important as we always, you know, struggle to find these journals in libraries, or, you know, Kaoukab's beautiful sort of walk through Mawrid and the different efforts and reasons for Mawrid, as well as Vasif's, you know, journey through SALT and his different and currently working at Mathaf. And as he was mentioning, you know, the dictionary of artists is still lacking everywhere else. So with that on the table, happy to take any questions from the floor to our speakers. I think Kaoukab is not online. It's probably really late in New York now at the moment. She's not? Yeah. So she's not online. So there, you know, Zahia and Vasif are here. Annika, go ahead. No, don't shout out. Yes.
Out into this microphone. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Nada, for the knitting the presentations together. My question springs from Vasif's presentation. We had the very interesting metaphor of archivists acting as traffic controllers rather than metadata creators. And I wondered if, Vasif, maybe you'd be willing to say more about that metaphor, and specifically, as I was listening to the procession of presentations, Kaoukab referred to the commodification of archives, and then I heard from Vasif the financialization of archives. Traffic controller is an interesting metaphor. It almost feels like a previous economy of highways and air travel or something. I'm wondering about this role of stop-go, if there's going to be something beyond traffic controller, that the next fate of the archivist as this financialization intensifies. And then maybe a question for Zahia, also trying to think through the question of money or resale. It was really interesting to see how fully the archive project, Seismography of Struggle, Writing Between Europe and the Arab World, is committed to using already scanned public materials. And yet at the same time, recently the Moroccan National Library collection went down. It was hacked. Nobody could access it. El Sharikh goes down from time to time, rebrands, remakes all its URLs. So in thinking about the archivist as traffic controller or the branding of access, I'm just curious about continuity of these free resources.
Thanks, Annika. Vasif, yeah, want to go ahead?
Sure, thank you so much. I wish I'd been there. You can hear me okay, yes? If you can just...
Clearly, yes.
Wonderful. About the commercialization and financialization of the archives, I mean, this started maybe over a decade ago. It particularly started with Latin American archives and collectors basically acquiring not only the works of the artists, but also the archives of the artists. And the move was really south to north to, for example, the History Museum of Fine Arts and other institutions, and Getty, and et cetera, et cetera. So there is a dissymmetry, obviously, in that certain institutions, certain international institutions have the capacity to acquire archives, and that really sends like a message to people who hold the archives, and they start to believe that this is a commercial entity. This is of commercial value rather than value to humanity, so to speak. And so that was a kind of a race, you know. And the only way, of course, I mean, for us to deal with that was to get the public rights, digitize them, and return them to their owners, to the estate or to the artists themselves. So at least we have, we don't completely lose in touch with the public aspect of the archive. And there's no way we can stop this. This is a process. This is going on, and it usually goes to the most powerful and the most well-known and et cetera, institution, which is usually in the north, not in the south. And then, which means that that's a transfer, that's a transfer of sorts. I mean, that's first a physical transfer, which makes it very hard for local researchers in their own countries to access materials at an institution which is thousands of kilometers away. I mean, this is one. Secondly, the access is limited, obviously. And the third one is that the codification level is the most critical aspect, which is things get codified to the knowledge systems in the place it goes to, like an activist work from 1960s from Argentina becomes a conceptual art in the 60s in Argentina, which is not one and the same thing. Because in the north they would read it as conceptual work, where in the south it is in touch with the public life. I mean, that's the commercialization and financialization part. I mean, it's a long discussion, but I'm just kind of limited it to the purpose. For traffic controllers, I think I have misled you. What I mean to say here is that I don't mean to imply that machine reading is without ideology. It is definitely, of course, with ideology, as ideological as anything else. But through machine reading, can we find things that we would not see otherwise? And also, since it's a visual reading that the machine does, at this moment, without the metadata, it is often producing less mistakes. And that's what I was interested in. We had fantastic archivists at SALT, and also temporary workers, just like any of us do, who had to know Western Armenian, Eastern Armenian, Arabic, French, German, old script, new script, etc., etc. You need all of this knowledge to process a document, but still, nevertheless, a lot of mistakes get done. Skodre or skutari are very close. So if you miss skutari with skodre, and the last person who checks the verification makes a mistake, they both make a mistake, let's say, then this document becomes completely inaccessible because it's misfiled. It's, and which is very, very common in archival practice. So I was trying to see, like, what if we have machine-read systems, machine intelligence systems that do a kind of a pre-sorting, and then the archivist does not have to do all of the work, but starts at a level of pre-sorting, and then says, okay, this goes here, this goes there, this is wrong, this is right, let's work on this, let's put this aside, etc., etc. That's kind of, I mean, this is definitely going to be the future role of the archivists. They will be, it will be machine assisted, not like more and more machine assisted. I mean, more than today. So that's why I went to Refik, Anadolu, and our sorting systems were at that time quite primitive, I have to admit. This was 7 years ago. And, we were able to kind of sort all the men with mustache, wearing glasses, and a fez, and a tie, for example. This would be easy to do. But that process granted us, which was not granted with any other human-made system, is that what were the orphan objects in the archive? Things that did not connect to anything else. The solitary objects, so on and so forth. I mean, that's that's what I mean by traffic controllers. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasif. Zahia?
Sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Vasif. Sorry, perhaps in this project about periodicals, we are in the gray law, in the gray line, you know, because it's the story of the fight, and nobody knows who is the property of the magazines, because the project began at the first years of the 19th century, you know, and it was against colonization, against war, and nobody knows who was the first. That's why I have the protection of my institution for that, and also light library, light institution in Europe, you know, was involved in this idea of free access with Europeana library, you know. The difficulty for me was, at this moment, the Arab world need this memory. And all this memory is not destroyed, but the access of this memory is difficult. And we need to find the new way for this access. You know, it's a little project, you know, but little project with little project with little project with a lot of little project. You can build a new way, you know. And I'm very proud also by one thing. I was surprised by the manifesto. I was really surprised by the manifesto from the 19th century and the 20th century, you know. You can't, sorry, I know it's not an insult, you know, but I was surprised how the French government was involved in the religion in North of Africa, you know, the pressure against other projects. They need this kind of, you need religion for the theist people, just one religion, you know. And I was surprised by also the fight of the woman in Egypt at the beginning of the 19th century too. And the Marxism, it's true, the Marxism was really important in the Arab world, just after the Second War. When I said Marxism, it was not about economy just, but it was the idea of community, you know. After also, the fight for the language was important too, with the Kurds people, Berber and the other, okay? But, you know, I'm a writer, but my work in the Institute of Art in Paris, it's not totally work. I'm a militant, it's politics. In the framework, but it's politics. Because my life, you know, I love my countryside, I love poetry, and I don't need this thing, but we need to change the background in Europe about the Arab world. Sorry.
Thank you, Zahia. I mean, you know, many of us work at Western institutions. We teach.
Play with the gray zone. You will need play with the gray zone. The gray zone, because about resources, it's not true. You know, the fight of the people, you don't change the fight of the people just with money. The symbolic is important too, you know, and we need this fight against, you know, the idea of you can buy all the fight. It's not true.
Thank you. Any other questions? And if we have any questions from our audience online, please filter them through. Let's get you a microphone, please.
So in one way or another, we're all sort of under the mercy of some sort of Western institution, whether it's our funding or the academic institutions that we're working within, or even the tools that we use to disseminate this information online or on different platforms. So even though this has happened for a very long time, but it's now very apparent with the crackdowns that are happening, especially within academic institutions, on a lot of the material or collections that we might have in these archives that we're talking about. So I'm just wondering about the contingency plans. I don't know, this might be too early right now, but the contingency plans that you might have or are considering when it comes to protecting access and to keep these archives within the communities that they represent.
That's an excellent question, as a matter of fact. Vasif, would you like to address that?
Well, I think it's a priority. I would only say that, I'm not quote unquote dependent on, I haven't been on Western institutions. And because from the get-go, we decided at our institution that, if we would have a curator in the institution, we would have a coder as well. So eventually we wrote our code for the archive and archival programs and everything. But sometimes the thing is twofold. There is also the need to protect the archive from the local context as well. Yes. That is to say, if the state, the government is allergic to your archival contents and what you do with the archive, they may shut it down. So it's always helpful to have let's say, to have a parallel, to have a backup outside the country, wherever they may be.
True. Zahia, do you like that?
Sorry. I agree with this idea. We need change the legislation about piece of art, about archive, because regularly you have a state, the politic change. Remember, for example, the wonderful Indian museum in Rio de Janeiro, the burning of this museum. It was the memory of the Indian people and the African people too. Nobody was involved in the rescue of this museum. And for me, it's the same fight in France and Europe. You are the property of all this piece in the museum. It's not the property of the state. Because the state changed, we need another law about piece of art and archive. We need, not from the state, the state protect, but it's not the property of the state. For example, in France, we have a lot of pieces of art from Africa, and you have a specific law about that now, inalienability, we can change the law about all this piece. It's the same for the archive tomorrow, The archive is not the property of the nation. Sorry. We need a new law, sorry, pardon.
Yet, on the other hand, I just want to add something, because in the case of Iraq, for specifically, there is no interest from the West, let's say, but there's no interest from inside of the nation either. So then that complicates things even more, because you don't, sources. Yes, Patrick.
I really admire the global journal online. I was looking at it. But I notice, I'm concerned about vulnerability of journals disappearing. An example I'll give is Professor Imad Abu-Ghazi and I worked on the Bonn University censorship project about, 9 years ago. And at that time, I was able to get all of the Muslim Brother journals, the Ikhwan al-Muslimun whole series in the 30s, and it was online, and at that time the Muslim Brothers were in power, and it's since vanished. Maybe I'm an idiot and I can't find it today, but those journals are not available online anymore, and they were crucial to me to be able to write the context of censorship against the Brotherhood in the 30s, and we're working on that. Professor Abu-Ghazi wrote the keynote chapter in that book. So these things can vanish, and that's my concern. And I really admire what you did. I noticed you had a journal in there called Bulaq, the Uyghur journal called Bulaq, B-U-L-A-Q. And at first I thought it might have been about the neighborhood Bulaq in Egypt, and it wasn't. But it was a Uyghur journal. When I clicked on see the volume, nothing opened up. So do these things are they rather ephemeral? And is there vulnerability to these digital archives, like the one I'm talking about disappeared?
Very good question about the vulnerability of digital archives, particularly as Vasif, saying that technology, and depending on even sorting machines. Yeah. You want to start, Zahia? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know there's difficulty, but it's difficult to, yes, because, for example, for my database, it's a connection with other library, digital database. And we need behind a team for the actualization of the resources. Yeah, I don't know if, but regularly in the different library in the world, you have a researcher for the reconnecting. We need to reconnect the resources because regularly you lose the resources, yes, and you need money for that because you need people behind of this structure. I don't know if.
Yeah, I mean it's not an easy question to answer. Vasif, would you like to add anything? No. Okay. Thank you. Yes, please. Microphone. Yeah.
Yes, I'd just like to return to the topic that was brought up, the very good question about sustainability of archives and the political pressure they face. And I really appreciated some of Vasif's comments on that. In my career as an archivist, I've been haunted by that, I have to say. I'll list just two examples that still haunt me to this day. One was listening to a conference presentation I attended in 2004 by somebody speaking, at that time a librarian at Harvard University, I believe he was, about the National Library and Archive of Bosnia that was intentionally targeted by Serbian forces during the war in Bosnia in the former Yugoslav republics in 1992 and destroyed, and how they were attempting to reconstruct whatever fragments they could of that archive through researchers and the photocopies researchers had made who'd used those collections over the decades. And that really kind of hit home because I worked at an institution in California, major research university, that could be critiqued for its quote-unquote colonialist approach, but which often saw itself as a safe harbor for archives that had been threatened in their home countries. So right or wrong, however you weigh that, I would just like to put that out there as an issue. And in the years since then, while I worked at that same archive, which had a heavy emphasis on archives from the former Soviet Union, we were approached by archivists in Europe who floated the idea of doing some sort of joint project to help the archives of Memorial in Moscow, which even in 2007, one could read the writing on the wall of what was going to happen. I could read the writing on the wall as a mere tourist visiting Moscow in 2009 when I visited the wonderful museum that documented the history of repression during the Soviet state and tried to keep that memory alive for Russian citizens, a memory that's been all but obliterated under Vladimir Putin's fascist state, which has shut down that archive. Back in 2007, we were sitting around a coffee table at Stanford University saying, is there anything our institutions can do to work jointly with other institutions to provide a safe harbor for digital surrogates? And needless to say, that idea got no traction. The threat was seen as minimal, and we never realized any of that. And so my question these days is what happens to archives like that? One can hope they survive. One can hope some form of archival Darwinism, if you will allow such valuable resources to resurface, but my fear is they won't. And those historic, valuable testimonies will be destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. But I mean, when we've been seeing this happening, like whatever is being destroyed in Gaza today, how is that going to be reconstructed and from where? And so I mean, the reality is we are losing archives as we speak continuously. Yes. Any other questions over there? Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I just thank you for the great presentation. It was really interesting. I'd like to piggyback on the Vasif's comments earlier about the machine training, the database. I'm a social scientist, formerly trained in art historians, and currently working on with the computer scientists to analyze those artworks and artists' life career data with more computer visions and other machine learning techniques. So one thing that I learned through the process was what ideally the machine training may not be efficient as we expected. Then there's some of those models that are actually getting help from those like a professional knowledge is actually can work better. So we are actually doing a lot of the experiments in between that, just like the unsupervised, the machine learning, like a deep neural model up against those, the supervised learning, getting a lot of the help from the archivists and then art historians to test which model actually perform better to predict, such as the price of the artworks, artistic success, even the gender of the artist, just by looking at the artworks. So it has become more successful. And what I tried to say is like, don't wait until those data has been already machine trained and then just coming after already treated and sorted out. But I think as an archivist, we need to really act fast and preemptively to finding the way of like sorting out and how to train those archives in advance. Because once the big neural model already processed and then we found some of those faulty issues there, we don't know which combination of the processes actually caused that mistakes. It's really even more difficult to fix those issues after they already made a mistake, because the patterns of the mistake is actually irregular there in many times. So I just wanted to kind of share my thought on his comments.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Actually, can I ask what time is it? Because I forgot my time to bring. Okay, we have time. Okay, great. We have plenty of time. Who had the question? Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Very brief comment on which was just shared about the precarious preservation of digitization of archives, but also bringing it back to communities. There's a project created a couple of years ago called Recover Mosul. And the art of Ziv Schneider was trying to wonder how to see traces of everything that was destroyed in Mosul. And of course, no archivist could help her, but community crowdsourcing could. So tourists that have been to Mosul have taken pictures, and these pictures are digitized. So machine learning was used not in a way we expected, so not as categorization, but as a form of collective reconstruction. So just bringing it back that sometimes community holding on to archives, we forget the values we share within these archives as well as communities. Just a little note on, maybe the solution does come from the machines, but not the way we expect them to.
No, this is definitely an excellent comment, because in fact, social media has contributed a lot where people just sort of have the photos and they upload them. And that has become an important source of research for me about Iraq, because this is where you find some of that material. But of course, then again, there are certain things that you just cannot recover. And, so thank you. You want to comment? Yes.
I want to say something about the protection of the archive. I was surprised, for example, about Black American people. The most important digital resource, they come from the British Library. Because at the middle of the 19th century, this country was against slavery. And I was surprised because the first part of the 19th century, you find very great magazines from the Black community in the United States about, culture and new country. The idea of build a new country in Africa. There are some magazines about this project, and the magazines also was print in Africa too, in the middle of the 19th century. The archive was, for me, in the United States, in the British Library. I want to say something about, for example, the Arab periodicals. Why the German community, the university in Germany, is the most library involved in the digitalization of Arabic periodicals. You have always behind this politics idea, because I agree, you know, I'm very happy because the University of Bonn in Germany was really involved in the protection and digitalization of the Arabs periodicals. But how and why the German university is involved in this idea of Arabs memory? You can play with this idea of the law diplomacy behind also. And so it's true, sometimes all is totally destroyed, but you have always another partner with another idea. It was involved in the conservation of the archive, but because the politics is behind. So just this thing, you know. It's not just for protect, but it's a law diplomacy. And also, you connected with this kind of politics, a new contract.
Vasif, would you like to say something? No, sure. Okay, no, I thought you wanted to say something. Yes, go ahead, Lara.
Thank you, all of you, and even the person who's now sleeping, Kaoukab, in New York. I wish she was here. Thank you so much for your presentations and also for these amazing archives that you've invited us to discover. And I also thank you, Salwa, for El Mawrid. I have a question for all of you, so feel free to answer. Basically from the point of view of being an artist, but also from being part of the Arab Image Foundation in Lebanon, we've been archiving photographs from the region for more than 20 years. I think we said 27 this morning. I'm curious to know now that you have these archives and that they are extremely rich and in content, in establishment, in terms of network also, as you showed us very well, how many people get involved in that process. How do we as artists, as academics, as all kinds of creators, how do we have access to these archives and are able to really work with them? And are you interested in also archiving that continuity of how the archive moves and is being used? And so is that is there a biography to the objects that is being archived also as part of your process?
Who wants to start?
Vasif?
Sure. No, not really. I mean, we don't track it. We don't track it down purposefully. So, in fact, it's because it would again centralize our. I mean, put us in the center of the equation by following the course of the data, or the course of the data turning into knowledge. That takes place outside the institution and by itself and within its own ecology. So that's completely fine, because I mean, even if we may, I mean, if SALT has is venerable institution with an amazing amount of data, it's only a node in a network of things. I like to think, even with its kind of numerical power, it only makes sense when it gets used. I mean, for me, the use part and the sharing part is much more critical, because that's when things turn into knowledge, and knowledge takes its own course. So that's I can't stress this enough, because I was really serious about Google harvesting, because without Google, you have to come to my institution through the door, through archives.saltresearch.org, etc., etc. But you don't need to do that. I just want to access things through the web and see where I can get it, which I know universities don't do it, research centers don't do it. They have their own reasons probably, but the fundamental thing being that although we use the web as a resource for our research, such a tiny fraction of the knowledge that is in the world that is actually accessible, it can be researched through a search engine. Yeah.
I want to say something about my project, because my project, we have a specific space. 19th century, 20th century, until the 89. The first was the magazine, the first magazine, the name is Abeille Haïtienne from Haiti. The last is Third Text. And I want to say something about the fight and how was the condition before the digital? Because all this magazine exists before the digital. With the digital, we have not the same condition. Because during the colonization, it was difficult to find paper, distribution, shop. And why you write magazines in the language of the colonizer, you know? You write magazines in English, in French, in German, in Netherlands, but it was not for your population. Because your population, your community, perhaps they don't know the French right, you know. You propose this thing for memories, fight, and also find sensibility, connection with the colonizer. You know, it was regularly, you have some cultural magazines in a vernacular language, you know, from Indian people, from Arab people, but the first regularly, it was always in French, in English, and the other, you know. You need to learn this language. You are Arabs, African, but you need to learn French, German, and English. You need to write in this language. You need connected with some friends. You need distribution, but regularly against the state. For example, in Algeria, it was not possible to print this kind of, you know. You write in Paris, and the magazine move in Morocco. If you want to know this kind of magazine. The situation today is really different with the digitalization. That's why, also, for me, my database is a monument at the memories of all these women and men was engaged in this kind of fight. But it's finished with the digital. It's not the same right. It's not the same fight. But it was very, very difficult. For example, some people in South Africa was in another country, in Tanzania or other country, you know. Now, in South Africa, there are wonderful digital library about the fight of the population and magazines. But during a long time, you know, you write magazines about South Africa in Ghana because you have a protection of the state. But it was very difficult at this moment. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the panelists, including Kaoukab. I have a question that's always kind of, I guess, a frustrating one with thinking about how archives are always with limited resources, but I'm really interested in hearing about principles or directives or frameworks that guide how, like possible ways for shaping the technical tools that we end up using. There's so much about the content and the networks and the people who are thinking about non-Western approaches, but how much of that is possible and how, what are the ways or ideas that shape those directions, whether it is through, I mean, you're so critical, Zahia, about cartographic methods, but I also see the map on the site and wondering that tension between those things and how much, whether there are lo-fi or hi-fi ways of resisting adopting the tools as they are and trying to shape them from a perspective of decolonial or like from our perspective, I guess. And like thinking with Google, for example, Vasif, I'm also interested in thinking how you mentioned different kinds of languages and having a in-house coder in order to do that. Is that the approach that is needed, or yeah? Anything you can share about that would be lovely. Thank you.
I won't say one term, but I don't know if this term exists in English. It's I have never found the really translation. In French, you have a specific term. They come from the critics movie, le contre-champ. And it's difficult to find this term in English, le contre-champ. And I love use this contre-champ because I'm born in North of Africa. My family moved in France. And I don't speak Arabs. I speak the Berber. And for all the people in my country, I was Arabs. But I grew up in the countryside, and I've never met Arabs. And I have a wonderful photography from my grandmother. She comes from North of Africa. And my grandmother, she looked like an Indian woman. And I don't know why. I grew up, when I was a child, I was an Indian. Because I grew up really in the countryside. You know, it's always the same for the people in the world, you know, the Arabs grow up in the suburban situation, but it was not for me. The house of my family was just behind the forest in Picardy. And during a long time, I was an Indian by the movie. And when the French people said to me, you are an Arab, for me, the Arabs was the Indian, you know? And it's the contre-champ, you know? I can understand how were these people just in front of me, because I have this kind of experience. And I love use the contre-champ, you know, how you receive this kind of proposition, you know. Voilà. It's a good practice for a lot of things, le contre-champ. Voilà. The perception of the other from your, you know, they come from Edward Said. Edward Said said the same thing, you know, with the Orientalism. Yes, yes. You are an Oriental. Okay, I receive this message from you. But my fight will be against this idea. Sorry.
Vasif?
Thank you. I mean, that's a great question to which I don't have an answer. The structure in which we work, I mean, at least which I worked at SALT, was a Western structure, so to speak. You know, it's Dublin core archiving metadata system, which is a Western system. Okay, we did the coding differently within it, but still it emanates from that. And this question actually is, I mean, affects so many things at the same time. For example, there's right now a new exhibition by the Islamic Art Department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art from their new collections, where they mix modern and contemporary art with historical works and et cetera, under the skin, within the skin and the structure of the museum, you know, and it doesn't fit, it doesn't work. You know, the structure doesn't work. The structure into which we parlay our works and our practices is colonial, period, you know. So it's about how you create that kind of healthy friction, create ruptures within that structure is the maximum that I think we can do, as long as we retain the name archive. You know, that's what it is. It's colonial, in essence. So we are working within it, but also against it. You know, I mean, this is the Foucault thing. It's pareisia. You know, you don't have to say, you can't only tell the truth. You have to be true. And that's the critical part. But that's, yeah, I mean, that's where we are. And I really don't know the answer to this great question, but it's one that has occupied me for years and years.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's being conscious of that is the one thing. So, for example, I can tell you at Al Mawrid specifically, this is a, oh, okay, now they're timing me. Al Mawrid specifically deals with this issue, what Selwa calls the drop-down menu, that, you know, she's working hard to change from within the collection itself, from within the archives. So it's a struggle. There is no answer, but there are, and I mean, I know Vasif is doing the same thing with the encyclopedia at Mathaf and, you know, in different things. So, you know, it's going to require a lot of work, because we are, most of us, work in Western institutions, trained in the West, and you know, we speak the colonial language, unfortunately. So it's tricky. Yeah, okay. So we have how many? Okay, Selwa. All right. Can someone?
Thank you all for amazing questions as well as presentations. I just want to draw attention to one experience that we have, and I'm always questioning that, is the selection, is access, equity, and the privilege, how we sometimes privilege certain materials, certain subjects to others. And the earlier question about the history of the object and how is extremely important in the sense that when we decide that this is an archive that we're going to work with, on what basis do we do that? Historically, this needs to be recorded, so that history of the object is extremely important. At the same time, we need to think of the equity, who has the privilege to access this material as well. Not all do. We sometimes assume that it's on the net, so everybody can access it. But that's not necessarily true. There's limitations. There's no perfect anything. But thinking always about the history of Al Mawrid, it's such a short history. But when I'm always thinking we should really take into consideration why these specific collections. Why not others? What happened that we ended up selecting these? And so the history is very important. Just want to say that. I know if Vasif, you had a similar situation in the very beginning, acquiring collections from all over.
Yeah.
Okay, we have like one more question.
It will be a quick one, promise. Thank you for the wonderful presentations. We've spoken a lot about multiple databases. Nada, you mentioned Maya, and Vasif, of course, with SALT and seismography, and we have Al Mawrid. My question is if we have a way to centralize all these databases. So as a researcher, when you're doing research, because a lot of this is very new, a lot of this, Nada, you mentioned you did this by yourself from scratch, no funding. Whether for us now, coming in to do research, we can have, or if this is a project that Al Mawrid will undertake, to centralize all these different databases. Because personally, before today, I've never heard about SALT, never heard about seismography. Maya, I've heard about because Nada, you've done a presentation before. So this is just my question, whether we're going to have a place that centralizes all these different databases and grants access to these invaluable archives.
Or at least, you know, sort of connects them and intersects them, yeah.
I give one answer. It was my first problem. Yeah, really, because I have a database in my on the site of my institution, but the idea was I need this database in free access, and it's very easy for you. You use this database because in the internet, and this database don't depend of my institution. It's in free access, but if you have not the publicity, the exchange, a lot of things about, it's difficult for you to know the existence of this kind of resources. Yeah. Perhaps tomorrow, I don't know, we build a new way with the free resources, a big portal about, you know, the free resources. We need connected all these free resources. You know. But I understand it takes a long time.
Yeah.
That's why I use publication, exhibition, talk, and the other for this idea of resources in free access. We don't need institution behind. It is in free access. And tomorrow, we need to build this kind of new, also pedagogy in new access, in free access, sorry.
Anything to add, Wasif?
Well, in terms of connecting the archives, that's very easy. I mean, that's fairly easy to do right now. This is not an issue, but it's just connecting what kind of archives and how do they speak together. I mean, you know, that's kind of the I guess the most critical part, and it can be done if there's a will. You know, that's what I guess we're looking for now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And on this note, because we also actually, we did not even talk about the issue of translation at all, which is a very important issue as well when we're working with archives, but we have other panels. We will now break for lunch. So first, let me thank the panelists. Thank you, Wasif from Turkey, Zahia from here, and Kaoukab in her dreams. She'll know that we are thanking her. And thank you all for being here very much. We will break for lunch for an hour and a half, and then, you know, we'll be back here for our next panel, which is sort of, you know, going to take the archives in a very different sort of artist perspective direction. Thank you.